It is still properly dark when I leave the house this morning, the kind of dark that makes you question just briefly whether this was really a sensible idea at all. No bird song yet, no light at the edges of the sky, just the cold and the quiet and the small circle of light from the torch in my hand, showing me one careful step of the path at a time. There is a mountain not far from where I live, not enormous, not dangerous, just tall enough to properly earn the climb. I have wanted to watch the sunrise from its summit for a long time now, and this morning, finally, felt like the right one to actually do it. Come with me if you like. It is a longer walk than usual, and a colder one too, but I promise you, the top is worth every step of the dark we have to walk through first. The path begins gently enough, winding up through a stretch of low woodland at the base of the mountain, my breath already visible in small pale clouds in front of me, the torch beam catching roots and loose stones just in time for me to step carefully around them. There is a word for the air at this hour, before dawn properly arrives, sharp and cold and clean in a way that almost stings slightly at the back of the throat. Crisp. C-R-I-S-P. Crisp. Crisp describes air, or sometimes light, that feels fresh, cold and clean, with a kind of sharpness to it that wakes you up almost immediately. The air this morning is properly crisp, cold enough to feel in my fingers and the tip of my nose, but clean in a way that feels less like discomfort and more like something quietly bracing, readying me for the climb ahead. You can say, the morning air was crisp and cold, or there's something lovely about a crisp autumn day. Crisp, the kind of cold that feels more like a greeting than a warning. The woodland thins out after perhaps 20 minutes of steady climbing, the trees growing shorter, sparser, more bent by wind than the ones lower down. I can feel the path beginning to steepen properly now, my legs working harder, my breath coming faster, the torch beam swinging slightly with each step. There is a word for the height above which trees stop growing on a mountain, where the climate simply becomes too harsh and exposed for them to survive. Tree line. T-R-E-E-L-I-N-E. Tree line. The tree line marks the point on a mountain or hillside beyond which trees can no longer grow, usually because of cold, wind, or thin soil at higher altitudes. I can feel myself approaching the tree line now, the last few stunted, wind-bent trees giving way to open, rocky slope, the wind suddenly noticeably stronger and colder now that nothing taller is left standing between me and it. You can say, above the tree line the landscape became bare and rocky, or we could see snow on the peaks above the tree line. Tree line. The mountain's quiet way of saying, from here you are on your own. The path beyond the tree line follows a series of switchbacks, cutting back and forth across the steep slope, each turn buying a little more height without the climb becoming impossibly steep all at once. I settle into a slow, steady rhythm, one foot, then the other, not rushing, simply continuing, the way any proper climb eventually has to be done. There is a word for this kind of zigzagging path, cutting back and forth up a steep slope rather than going straight up it. Switchback. S-W-I-T-C-H-B-A-C-K. Switchback. A switchback is a sharp bend in a path or road, part of a route that zigzags up or down a steep hillside, making the climb gentler and more manageable than a straight ascent would ever allow. This path is full of switchbacks now, turn after turn after turn, each one a small, deliberate compromise between the mountain's steepness and my own too tired legs. You can say, the trail climbed the cliff in a series of switchbacks, or We counted 12 switchbacks before reaching the top. Switchback, a path's polite way of being patient with you. Even with the switchbacks helping, certain sections of this path simply refuse to be gentle. Short, brutal stretches where the ground rises sharply and there is no clever zigzag clever enough to soften it. My legs burn properly through one of these sections now, lungs working hard in the cold air, each breath sharper and more deliberate than the last. There is a word for how steep a slope or path is, the rate at which the ground rises or falls. Gradient. 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 Gradient describes the steepness of a slope, how sharply the ground rises or falls over a given distance, often used for roads, paths, and mountainsides alike. This particular stretch has a brutal gradient, far steeper than anything I have climbed so far this morning, and I find myself leaning forward instinctively, hands occasionally finding rock to steady myself, simply to keep moving forward against it.
You can say, the road has a steep gradient near the summit, or cyclists dread that section because of its gradient. Gradient. The mountain's way of asking, quite plainly, how much you actually want this. Somewhere around the 8th or 9th switchback, I notice the sky beginning to change. Not bright yet, nothing close to sunrise itself, just the faintest, barest hint of grey creeping into what was, until a few minutes ago, complete, uninterrupted black. I switch off the torch experimentally and find to my quiet relief that I can just about make out the path without it now. There is a word for that very first faint light before sunrise, when the sky is no longer fully dark, but the sun itself has not yet appeared. Dawn refers to the whole period, but there is a more specific word for this particular early stage. Pre-dawn, or more simply, first light. First light. First light describes the earliest, faintest brightening of the sky before sunrise properly begins. A soft, grey, uncertain kind of light, not yet warm, not yet golden, just the sky slowly admitting that night is ending. I climb on through this first light now, the path gradually becoming visible around me in soft greys and blues, shapes I could only guess at minutes ago, slowly resolving into actual stones, actual slopes, actual distance. You can say, we left camp at first light to beat the heat, or there's something magical about first light on a mountain. First light. The sky's first, hesitant admission that morning is coming. The terrain changes again as I climb higher still, proper grass and rock giving way gradually to looser, smaller stones underfoot, my path harder to follow clearly, my boots sliding slightly with almost every step. This is clearly the final, steepest stretch before the summit itself. There is a word for this loose, broken rock and small stones found on steep mountain slopes, especially near the top. Scree. S-C-R-E-E. Scree. Scree is loose rock debris, small broken stones and rubble that have gathered on a mountainside, usually near the summit, notoriously difficult and slippery to walk across. I am properly on scree now, every step a small negotiation between forward progress and not sliding back half of what I have just climbed, each stone shifting slightly under my boots with a dry, scattering sound that echoes faintly off the rock around me. You can say, the scree made the final stretch much harder than expected, or we had to be careful crossing the loose scree near the top. Scree, the mountain's last, small test before it lets you through.
I push on through the scree, breathing harder now, properly working for every meter of height, and then, quite suddenly, the ground levels out beneath my feet. No more incline, no more climb, just flat, open rock, and beyond it, nothing but sky. There is a word for the very top of a mountain, the highest point you can possibly reach. Summit. 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 The summit is the highest point of a mountain or hill, the place where, quite literally, there is nowhere higher left to climb. I am standing on the summit now, properly out of breath, properly cold, and properly completely amazed at what is slowly beginning to appear all around me as the sky continues steadily to lighten. You can say, we finally reached the summit just before sunrise, or the view from the summit was absolutely worth the climb. Summit, the single point where the whole mountain finally runs out of up. I find a flat, sheltered spot near a small tile of stacked stones, clearly left here by other climbers long before me, and sit, finally, properly still, pulling my jacket tighter against the wind, and simply wait. There is a word for that small pile of stones, often built deliberately by walkers to mark a summit, a trail, or simply that someone else has been here before you. Cairn. C-A-I-R-N. Cairn. A cairn is a small, human-made pile of stones, often built on mountain summits or along trails, sometimes to mark a path, sometimes simply as a quiet marker that other people have stood in this exact spot before. This summit has its own cairn, carefully balanced, clearly added to by dozens, maybe hundreds of hands over the years. A small, simple monument built from nothing but patience and loose stone. You can say, we added a stone to the cairn at the summit, or the cairn marked the highest point of the trail. Cairn, proof in stone that someone else once stood exactly where you are standing. Sitting here beside the cairn, I notice something else too, something I always forget about until I am properly up high again. The quiet. Not silence exactly. There is still wind, still the occasional distant call of some bird I cannot see, but a particular kind of hushed stillness that simply doesn't exist down in the valley, where there is always some background hum of life going on somewhere nearby.
There is a word for a stillness so complete, it feels almost as though the whole world has paused to listen along with you. Hush. H-U-S-H. Hush. A hush is a sudden or deep stillness, a quiet so complete it feels deliberate, almost respectful, the kind of silence that makes you instinctively want to lower your own voice to match it. There is a proper hush over this whole summit right now, just wind and distance, and the faint, far-off sounds of a valley not yet fully awake. A stillness so complete that I find myself, without really deciding to, holding my own breath slightly, just to listen to it properly. You can say, a hush fell over the mountain as the sun began to rise, or there was a strange hush in the room before the announcement. Hush. Quiet, thick enough to actually notice. Below me now, as the light continues to grow, I can properly begin to make out the valley itself, still mostly grey and shadowed, far beneath where I am sitting, fields and a thin winding river, and the small scattered lights of a village, slowly, one by one, switching off as morning approaches. It is an extraordinary thing, seeing a whole valley laid out beneath you like this. So much space, so much land, all of it suddenly visible at once.
There is a word for a wide, sweeping view, especially one seen from a high place, taking in a very large area of land at once. Panorama. P-A-N-O-R-A-M-A. Panorama. A panorama is an unbroken view of a wide area, usually seen from an elevated position, taking in far more of the landscape than would normally be visible from ground level. What I am looking at right now is a proper panorama, valley and hills and distant ridges all visible in one single sweeping view, more landscape than I think I have ever taken in with a single turn of my head. You can say the summit offered a breathtaking panorama of the whole valley, or we stopped to take in the panorama before continuing. Panorama, the reward for climbing high enough to finally see it all at once. The sky to the east is properly changing colour now, the grey of first light slowly giving way to something softer, paler, thin streaks of pale gold and pink beginning to spread just above the distant ridgeline. I sit very still, watching it happening, not wanting to miss a single moment of it. There is a word for that long, low line where the mountains or hills meet the sky in the distance. Ridgeline. R-I-D-G-E-L-I-N-E. Ridgeline. A ridgeline is the long raised edge formed where one or more mountain ridges meet the sky, often a clear, continuous line visible from a distance, separating land from open air. The sun is about to rise directly behind a distant ridgeline right now, the sky above it glowing steadily brighter, the dark shape of the ridge itself growing sharper and more defined with every passing minute. You can say we watched the sun rise just above the ridgeline, or the trail follows the ridgeline for several miles. Ridgeline, the exact place that the earth hands the sky back its light. And then, quite suddenly, it happens. A single brilliant point of light appears right at the ridgeline, almost too bright to look at directly, and within what feels like only a few seconds, the whole sun lifts free from the horizon entirely, flooding the valley below with warm golden light all at once. There is a word for that exact moment when the sun first becomes fully visible above the horizon. Sunrise, of course, but there is a more poetic word too, often used for this specific moment. Daybreak. D-A-Y-B-R-E-A-K. Daybreak. Daybreak refers to the time when daylight first properly appears, the moment the sun breaks the horizon and true morning begins. This is daybreak happening right in front of me, light pouring suddenly and generously across the whole valley, the river below catching it first, turning briefly to bright liquid gold, then the fields, then the rooftops of the village, each one waking in turn into the new day. You can say we woke at daybreak to start the long drive, or daybreak painted the whole sky in gold and pink. Daybreak, the single moment the whole world quietly changes shift. I sit perfectly still on the summit, letting the warmth slowly reach me, the the cold of the climb beginning finally to ease. Below, I can see thin trails of mist still clinging to parts of the valley floor, not the thick fog of an enclosed garden, but something looser, more scattered, pale patches drifting low over the fields, slowly beginning to burn away now that the sun has properly arrived. There is a word for that kind of low-lying mist or cloud, especially seen drifting in patches across low ground from somewhere higher up. We have spoken of fog before on another walk, but there is a gentler word for mist exactly like this. Haze. H-A-Z-E. Haze.
Haze describes a thin, slightly cloudy or misty quality in the air, softening the view slightly without ever fully blocking it, very different from thick ground-level fog. There is a soft haze still sitting over parts of the valley right now, blurring the furthest details slightly, giving the whole landscape a soft, slightly dreamlike quality that I suspect will be completely gone within the hour. You can say, a light haze hung over the valley this morning, or the heat created a haze on the horizon. Haze, softness, borrowed briefly from the last of the night. I want to talk to you for a moment now, directly sitting here at the very top of this climb, about scale and about distance and about what it actually does to a person, standing somewhere this high, looking down at absolutely everything at once. From down in the valley, this mountain is enormous, something to be looked up at, planned around, climbed carefully and respectfully. But from up here, looking down, the whole valley, the village, the river, the fields, all of it suddenly looks impossibly small, manageable in a way it never could from inside it. I think there is something genuinely valuable in that shift of perspective. Whatever feels large and unmanageable from inside our ordinary lives, a worry, a problem, a difficult week, often looks smaller, more survivable from just slightly further away. You do not have to solve anything up here. You simply have to notice how much smaller everything looks once you have gained even a little height above it. There is a word for this feeling, a sense of how small and temporary your own concerns become when placed against something much larger than yourself. Perspective. P-E-R-S-P-E-C-T-I-V-E. Perspective. Perspective means a particular way of viewing or understanding something, often a wider, more balanced way of seeing things, especially after stepping back from a situation. Sitting up here gives you exactly that kind of perspective, not because the climb itself solves anything, but because for a little while at least, everything down there simply looks like what it actually is. Small, temporary, survivable. You can say, travel always gives me a bit of perspective, or from up here, you really get some perspective on things. Perspective, the view that only height and a little distance can properly give you. I think this is partly why people have always climbed mountains, long before there were proper paths or torches or any of this, not simply for the view itself, lovely as it is, but for exactly this feeling sitting here now,
the sense of having earned a slightly different way of seeing things through nothing more complicated than sustained effort and a willingness to start walking while it was still dark. Nobody drives to a summit like this. You always have to climb for it, one tired step at a time. And I think that effort is precisely what makes the perspective, once you arrive, feel properly earned rather than simply handed to you. There is a small separate pleasure too in doing this alone, or just with one or two others, rather than as a part of a crowd. No cue for the view, no one else's voice competing with the wind, just this particular hush, this particular light, belonging for these few minutes almost entirely to whoever was patient enough, or simply stubborn enough, to climb up here in the dark for it. I think, too, about how briefly this particular view will last. Already the haze is thinning further, the light growing fuller and less golden, more ordinary, the soft pinks and ambers of daybreak quietly giving way to the plainer, brighter blue of a perfectly normal morning. In another hour, this will simply be a mountain view, lovely, certainly, but no longer this exact fleeting golden thing I happened to be sitting here for. There is a word for something that lasts for a short time, here and then gone, impossible to properly hold on to. Fleeting. F-L-E-E-T-I-N-G. Fleeting. Fleeting describes something that passes very quickly, lasting only a brief moment before it's gone, never quite able to be held on to or repeated in exactly the same way. This particular light, this particular sunrise, is entirely fleeting, already changing as I sit here describing it to you, which is, I think, precisely why it feels worth climbing in the dark for in the first place. You can say, the beautiful light was fleeting, gone within minutes, or happiness can feel fleeting, but it always returns. Fleeting. Beauty that knows exactly how briefly it is allowed to stay. I stand up eventually, my legs stiff from the cold and the climb and the long still sitting afterwards, and take one last long look across the valley before I begin making my way back down. The mist has almost completely gone now. The village below is fully lit, fully awake, small figures, I imagine, already moving about their own quiet mornings, with absolutely no idea what the world looked like from up here just an hour or so ago.
The path down is, in its own way, just as careful as the path up, the loose scree just as tricky to navigate in daylight as it was by torchlight, though admittedly far easier now that I can actually see where I am putting my feet. I move slowly, in no real hurry, glancing back over my shoulder more than once, just to watch the summit grow smaller and smaller behind me. The switchbacks feel entirely different heading downward, each turn now simply a gentle, familiar rhythm, rather than a small negotiation with exhaustion, my legs grateful in their own tired way for gravity finally being on their side for once. The wind has dropped considerably too, the brutal, exposed gusts of the summit replaced by something far gentler now that the sun has properly warmed the whole mountainside. Before we finish this walk together, I want to give you a few phrases, English for climbing, for mountains, and for that particular quiet satisfaction that comes after reaching somewhere high. The first phrase, "It was worth every step," used after a difficult climb or journey when the result clearly justified the effort. That climb was exhausting, but it was worth every step. A simple, honest way of saying the hard part was entirely justified. The second phrase, "You can see for miles up here," used to describe an especially wide, far-reaching view from a high vantage point. "Come and look, you can see for miles up here." A simple invitation to come and share in exactly how far the eye can travel. The third phrase, "We made it just in time," used when arriving somewhere right as something important is about to happen. "We made it to the summit just in time for sunrise," said with a small, relieved smile, knowing how easily it might have gone the other way. And the fourth phrase, "It puts things into perspective," used after an experience that makes ordinary worries feel smaller or more manageable. Standing up there really puts things into perspective. A quiet, grateful way of acknowledging exactly what height and distance can sometimes do for a tired mind. The words from this walk: crisp, tree line, switchback, gradient, first light, scree, summit, cairn, hush, panorama, ridgeline, daybreak, haze, perspective, fleeting, words for climbing, for mountains, and for the particular kind of stillness that only seems to exist right at the very top. The phrases, "It was worth every step," "You can see for miles up here," "We made it just in time," "It puts things into perspective." I reach the tree line again as I descend, the wind softening noticeably as the first low trees rise up around me once more, the path beneath my boots turning gradually from loose stone back to proper packed earth. The sun is fully up now, warm on the back of my neck through the branches, the whole woodland filled with birdsong that simply was not there a few hours ago. Every creature, it seems, just as glad as I am that the night is finally properly over. I think, walking back down through the trees, about how strange it is that the mountain looks completely different now than it did on the way up. Not because it has changed at all, but because I have now seen it in two entirely different lights. Dark and uncertain on the way up, golden and generous at the top, familiar and gentle now on the way back down. Three completely different mountains, all of them somehow exactly the same one. I reach the bottom of the path eventually, the woodland giving way to the familiar lane that leads back towards home, my legs properly tired now, my boots dusty with scree, but my head in the best possible way, still half full of that golden light pouring suddenly across the valley, still half standing somewhere at that quiet, windswept summit. Wherever you are listening from tonight, I hope you find somewhere in your own life a little room for climbing towards something, even when the way up feels dark, even when you cannot yet see the top. The light does come. It always, eventually, does. Until next time, take care of yourself, and if you can, sometime soon, find a hill or a rise, or even just a tall enough rooftop near you, and watch the sun come up properly from somewhere a little higher than usual. It changes something, even if only for a morning. Good night for now. May your own summit, wherever it is, be waiting patiently for you whenever you are ready to climb it.